Howdy, welcome to Bake Day. Piece of advice, if you're struggling to get hold of flour at the moment, go and visit a bakery. Most of them should be open and operating still, and most of them will have industrial sacks of flour out back. If they don't have any on the shelf for sale, more often than not, they're happy to sell you a kilogram or two of their own stores. That's what I did yesterday. Picked up 2 kilograms of the finest bread flour from a local bakery. £1.50 a pop. Delighted with that. Right, today we're making bread. Kinda. As I mentioned before, the baking process is actually split over the course of 2 days. So technically speaking, today we're preparing dough. Tomorrow we're baking bread. But today's the most important part. Of all the intricacies and complications and things that can go wrong with baking sourdough, today's where most of the hiccups usually come. So we're going to go through it slowly. I'm actually going to do most things twice because I'm going to prepare a loaf from Juno, the starter we've been making together during this course, but at the same time I'm going to prepare a loaf from my usual starter. So at the end we can compare the two, how a mature starter has reacted compared to a newer starter, but also so I can kind of do everything twice and show you guys properly to really cover off some of the kind of slightly more intricate steps. First things first, I need to get all my kit ready. I've got pretty much everything I need. Now again, just to reiterate, I'm going to make 2 loaves. One, I'm going to do exactly the same as you guys are doing at home. We're going to use the same ratios, the same amount of flour with our brand new starter. The second one, I'm going to bake the way I usually would bake it, so it's slightly different ratios. I'm not going to say them out loud because I don't want to confuse what's going on, but it's slightly different ratios to show you what you're building towards, what you're working towards. Now, the key difference between the two is basically how much water we're going to use. The tricky thing about sourdough in this phase is it's a wet dough. That means it's really sticky. Your hands are naturally quite warm. That means every time you're touching a wet dough, that stickiness is glamming right on there. That's what a lot of newbies struggle with, is not being able to do the shaping and kind of getting the dough in the right place because of how warm it is. So the way we get around that in the beginning is we work with a little bit less water, which in the baking world is known as a lower hydration. So you can kind of get to grips and get to feel with the dough and kind of work your way through the levels until you are more capable and more confident, and then you up the amount of water. So for those that are interested, we're going to bake a loaf of sourdough bread with our brand new starter at about 62% hydration. It should give you the best opportunity of turning out your first loaf of sourdough bread in the best shape as possible. The one I'm going to prepare is going to be about 74% hydration, so quite a lot wetter, but not super wet. Sometimes I do them as high as 80%. You can do them as high as 90%. The place to start is a lower level hydration, a little bit less water, just makes your first few bakes so much easier. I think I did my first 3 or 4 kind of like 60-62%. Here are the key numbers you're going to want to know. I write all my numbers down, all my maths down on the back of flour packets, and I pin them to a pin board. Because I regularly cook at different hydration levels, I already have the maths written out on the pin board for me. So I pick up, this is a sheet for the day, look at what I'm doing. Each loaf I'm doing is going to need his own jug to live in for the day, and his own mixing bowl, or her own mixing bowl. I keep going really gender specific here, come on. To give an overview of the day, here's roughly how the format is going to go. Right now, we're just going to prepare the starter. Simple as that. We're going to leave that for a few hours to rise up. Then we're going to blend the starter with the flour. Then we're going to prepare the flour and the water and blend those together. Step 3, we're going to add the starter into that dough mixture. Step 4, we're adding the salt. Then we're going to go through several hours of folding and playing with it. Then we're going to leave it alone to rise up. And then later on this evening, we're going to shape it into that nice looking shape ready to be popped in the fridge overnight. But one step at a time, and let's get things right. So, just like we have been doing the previous days, we're going to extract a pile of our starter. Today this serves a dual purpose in that it is part of his natural feeding process, but instead of wasting the discard, we're going to bake with it. See how nice and bubbly he is in there? How much activation's gone on? That's exactly how we want him when we come to bake. Spot on. Delighted with that. I'm going to take off our usual amount of about 100 grams, roughly. Don't need to be precise just yet. Boom. There's 100 grams. Here's a key trick that made the biggest difference to when I came to start making sourdough bread, getting this step right. Actually measuring this and getting it as bang on is quite useful. So we've extracted 100 grams of our starter. We're going to feed our starter as normal by only putting another 100 grams back in there. So another 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water, just like we have been doing. That's for there. For here, the amount we're going to bake with, we're changing the ratios. This is now becoming a 1:1:1 ratio. 1 portion starter, 1 portion flour, 1 portion water. So if we've extracted 100 grams of starter, we want to add into that 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. So what we end up with there is a mixture of about 300-ish grams. And we're going to let that sit and kind of really properly excite itself, really ferment itself, ready to be baked with. We've got 100 grams in there, fresh from the bakery. 75 grams of flour and 75 grams of strong bread flour or strong white flour. This is the time where, as I've been hammering it along, if you've got hold of that bread flour, now's the time to use it. This starts to make a big difference today. So 75 grams of this, that's 74, that'll do me. So 74 grams of white, let's top it up to the 100 with the wholemeal. Great. So 100 grams of fresh flour into the top of my 100 grams of starter. Now, I've already prepared a pile of warm water. Let's talk about water temperature for a moment. For the portion you've siphoned off that we're going to make bread with, you can use warmer water. In fact, I'd encourage you to use slightly warmer water. Kind of tepid, basically. The slightly warmer it is, the quicker the reaction inside of this jug occurs and the sooner you can have it ready to bake. I don't put warm water into my main starter because you want that to take a long time. If you were to put warm water in there, you'd need to feed it more regularly. If you put too cold a water in your starter, your flour all clumps together. So just straight normally out the tap is fine for your starter. If you have very cold tap water, maybe let it set for a moment, room temperature. Going into the portion we're going to bake with, you want it a bit warmer than that. So that's, lukewarm. And I want 100 grams. Right, so in my jug, I've got 100 grams of starter, 100 grams of fresh flour, and 100 grams of water. Simple. Mix that up, and we're going to set that aside. Again, the aim with this is just like if we were mixing our usual starter, we want no dry bits. What you will notice, however, is that this is going to be considerably thicker, this mixture. This is the one time that you can be a little bit vigorous with things to get this all mixed in. You don't really want any clumps in there. Later on, we're going to talk a lot about being very soft and gentle with the bread, But here is where you can kind of put your back into it a little bit, get it all mixed up nicely. The portion of our starter that we have separated out, that is going to be the bit we bake with for today, that's now ready to rock and roll. Let's take a look at the timing. Right now, it's about 9:30. Pop that in the corner so we can keep an eye on the time. This needs to sit until it has started to expand. So it's sometimes, depending on how good and strong your starter is, this might double in size. Sometimes it triples in size. What you're really just looking to see in the first few bakes, that this is getting pockets of air, little pockets of air all around the sides, and has started to swell up. If you've got a marker or a band or a bit of tape or whatever, or you can just read off the jug and you remember where the level is, that's useful to know. Once we've seen it expand a bit, that's when we know it's ready to bake. Again, depending on how active and good quality your starter is, depends on how much it rises up. And we basically just need to keep an eye on it over the next few hours. It typically takes 90 minutes to kind of 3-4 hours for it to rise up. So I just pop a little light cloth on it, I stick it up in its warm place, and I'll come back and check that probably in about an hour and a half, and then again in 2 hours' time. When it started to show signs of rising up, that's when we're going to start to prepare the flour and the main body of water that's going to be the bread dough. In the meantime, I'm going to quickly feed my starter, as usual, with 50 grams of fresh flour and 50 grams of water, tuck him away and put him where he normally lives. We'll revisit him again tomorrow. I'm then going to repeat exactly the same process with my older starter, Terry, that I normally use. So I'm going to get him ready and sat up on the side alongside Juno so I can make both loaves. Right, bear with me a moment. So the starter is prepped, or in my case, both starters. They're sat up there for a couple of hours now, starting to rise up and get super, hyper, mega active. The next step, once we've seen that start to rise, is we're going to start setting aside the amount of bread flour we need into our mixing bowl to do the next we're going to start setting aside the flour we need, combined with the water we need, to start a process called Autolyse. That's effectively where we let the flour and the water form these lovely glutinous bonds, which is the foundation of the bread we're going to build. We don't need to do that just yet, but I'll probably revisit at about 11 o'clock and see how we're getting on. Until then, prep yours, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Right, let's have a little check and see how we are getting on. Oh, lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely jubbly. Look at that. Juno has swollen up nicely, ready to make some bread out of. We've probably got about an inch worth of growth there, which for a brand new starter, I'm quite happy with. If you look all the way round there, you can see little bubbles and holes the whole way round. That's exactly what we're looking for. That's exactly what we're looking for. We're going to give her another 45 minutes just to keep swelling a little bit while we prepare the dough. Finally, the time to start making some actual bread dough. Right, what you're going to need here is your mixing bowl on a set of scales, zeroed. Something to mix with. I use a little plastic spatula. You're going to need your flour, and you're going to need a pile more lukewarm water. As we said earlier on, we're making about a 62% hydration loaf. I've already done all the maths for you. Again, I'll stick it here on the screen and I'll talk you through it as we go. The first thing we're going to put in is the flour. Now, we are looking for a total of 375 grams of flour total. I highly recommend a split of wholemeal and white if you've got it. And remember, again, this is bread flour or strong white flour. baking loaves of bread with plain flour is not going to give you the effect you're after. So strong white or bread flour. As I've said a bunch of times before, if you don't have this yet, just do your normal feed and wait till tomorrow or the day after when you might be able to get hold of some. Makes a big difference. So 375 grams total. We do not split it evenly. The whole meal, as we've mentioned before, is quite a demanding flour to work with, so I only use a sprinkling of it. I'm going to go with about 50 grams of wholemeal flour to start us off. There we go, that's 51. The rest is going to be the white flour, taking us up to the total of 375. Great, 375 grams total. So far, it's just in there. Don't need to mix them together, just pop them in. Right, now's the bit where precision really comes into play. We're going to add 235 grams of your lukewarm water. If you end up with a little bit less than that, it's fine. The further you go over the 235, the harder you're going to find the dough to work with if this is the first time you're baking bread. Right, here we go. Don't mess it up. 232. Okay, get it right. 33. 34. 35, there we go. 235. Okay, now it's just simply a case of blending these three ingredients together till we've got kind of like a shaggy mess, I suppose. We don't want to have any loose water flying around. We want it all kind of blended together. No dry bits. And what's going to happen here is the flour, the two types of flour, are going to bond with this warm water and start to form the glutinous structure that is the kind of base of the whole loaf that you're making. So from here on out, we're going to treat what's in this mixture with a lot of care and attention. You don't want to be forceful with it. You don't want to do any big tearing motions. You want to kind of gently rub it all together. Try as much as you can to get all the dry bits incorporated into this big shaggy mess that's forming. You'll notice it will clump together on there usually. That's where the last of the moisture will remain. At this stage, to the touch, the clumps will stick straight to your fingers. There's normally a little bit of dry flour hiding underneath. Make sure you get that out and get that incorporated into the mixture. You'll be able to poke your finger into it and form little indents which spring back quite quickly. We're going to leave this to effectively to go through a process called Autolyse. Like I said, that's where all those glutinous bonds are starting to form. Probably going to take about 45 minutes. So that gives Juno the last 45 minutes of her swelling process. This is going to have its Autolyse. Then we're going to start to blend it all together. Cover it with a cloth, so there's not too much air getting to it. Right, I'm going to make up my other one. I'll see you guys in 45 minutes, ready for the next step. Right, now let's start to get into the meat of this. It's been about 45, maybe 50 minutes. We've got a nice bit of rise, lots of lovely bubbles on top of this. It looks really, almost like it's about to start foaming. Really happy with how that's coming out. I've probably got an extra centimetre's worth of growth out of my more mature starter than my newbie starter. But they're both nice and bubbly and ready to get mixed in. Your dough has been sat there for the last, like I said, 45, 50 minutes. There's no moisture left anywhere. It's just this kind of like half dry, shaggy mess. What we're going to do now is we're going to incorporate the starter into the dough, and we're going to start to do our first stretch and fold. When you think about traditional baking, there's always a lot of kneading of the dough. We don't do lots and lots of kneading with sourdough. We do some gentle folding and some shaping, but as I mentioned before, we don't want to be doing any tearing or hard pressing or hard work, because that ruins the glutinous structure, the glutinous bond that's forming. Also, we want minimum contact time with our hands, because once we incorporate this all together, it is going to be quite a sticky mixture. So it's all about deliberate, gentle, but quite fast movements. You don't want to be lingering with your hands all in it, because every time you come away, it's going to be up to your arms. The stretch and fold technique is very, very simple. We're basically pulling the dough and folding it over on itself. Pulling it out, folding it over on itself. And you do that 4 times, and that's 1 round of stretch and fold. Now I aim to do 5 or 6 rounds of stretching and folding spaced out every 20 or 30 minutes for the next few hours. This is the part of the day that when you come to baking more regularly, you know, you'll make, if you're working at home, for instance, you'll make sure you've got a timer set. Every 20 minutes, half an hour, just wandering back, doing a few stretches and folds for literally 30 seconds, and then going back to what you were doing. Today we're going to take our time, be very deliberate over it so you can see how it works. First and foremost, let's incorporate the starter. Now, I want 112 grams of this lovely bubbly starter. We've obviously made a lot more here than 112 grams, and I'm kind of overdoing everything so you can see how it all works and you can really get a feel for what it's all supposed to look like. If you're only working with smaller amounts, it might take quite a bit longer to prove and it might be a bit of a slower learning process. So I'm kind of exaggerating everything that's going on in here on purpose. Right, 112 grams of this poured into the top. That is 114. Perfect, happy with that. Right, so as it stands, we've got dry dough with this slop on top. And I now effectively use my spatula to incorporate the two together. I'm basically rolling it round, so I'm just folding it in gently for the first stretch and fold. There we go. What we end up with is quite a sticky, almost slimy little ball. And this starter is now going to start to work with that glutinous structure that's forming and start to kick it up a few gears, like quite quickly. Then the stretching and folding adds even more energy into the process. So the first task here, just for the first round, is to very simply incorporate it all together. I'm just folding it over and pressing it down. All right, press it down. There we go. Lovely jubbly. Right now, that's what she looks like. A little bit slimy. She can slip around in there. That's it for the first stretch and fold. I'm going to set myself a timer for 20 minutes. What we'll start to notice as we do more and more of these is the dough becomes more and more pliable. So you'll be able to pick it up with your hands, stretch it out, fold it over itself a lot easier. And also, the more we do, the less will stick to your hands. So by the time, excuse me, by the time you're on stretch and fold number 4 or 5, you should be able to do this process and not really have to clean dough off your hands. You obviously need to wash your hands, but you shouldn't have loads of dough stuck everywhere. It should be a relatively clean process. And that's where all of that bread, that's where all these ingredients then start to form this lovely, pliable, soft dough that we're going to shape into a loaf of bread. For now, I'm going to pop a hat on him, give him 20 minutes, and then we're back to fold him over. In the meantime, I'm going to add some starter into my other guy. Right, 20 minutes-ish later. Let's have a look. Yes. Okay, it's time for our first stretch and fold. Where's my doohickey? Here's my doohickey. So, as I mentioned before, this next few hours, we're going to revisit the bowl every 20 minutes, and our aim is to knead the bread gently. We're not going to be sitting here working it like you do with pizza dough or kind of other types of bread, really light kind of bread. What we're going to be doing here is gently folding it over on itself and then leaving it alone to let its weight do the work of the kneading. Very simply, this is how I do it. I run a spoon around the outside of the bowl so that it's not stuck to the sides. I then, looking on at it, I then grab it from one side, I pull and I fold it over, and I turn it 90 degrees. So let's go. So I've run my spoon round the outside so I can get a purchase on it, and then I'm grabbing it, I'm pulling it, and I'm folding it over. Okay? Turn it 90 degrees. I'm reaching in, I'm grabbing it, I'm pulling it, and I'm folding it over. Turning it 90 degrees. Grabbing it, pulling it, folding it over. 90 degrees. Last one, grabbing it, stretching it out, and then folding it over on itself. That is stretch and fold number 1 done. Look how mucky my hand is. Okay? As I said, by stretch and fold 4 or 5, my hand will be considerably cleaner than this, and that'll show that we've done this part right. Also, by stretch and fold number 4 or 5, the dough will start to feel very different in our hands. At the moment, it feels quite clumpy in places and not really very smooth. After a while, it's going to feel nice and smooth and elastic and quite responsive to what we're doing. Right now, it's fighting us a little bit. That'll change slowly. I'm not adding the salt this time. I'm going to add the salt on the next one. So watch out for that. But right now, stretch, fold. I'll be back in 20 minutes. Right, next round. Proper stretch and fold number 2. Spatula. Turn it round a few times so he basically forms a nice ball. That gives me the ability to get right underneath him. Give him a stretch, he's already slightly different, and give him a fold over. Turn it 90 degrees. Get underneath, give him a nice stretch, and flop. Turn him round. Give him a stretch, and flop. Around. Give him a stretch, nice and gently. We're not pulling on him too hard. If he doesn't want to stretch too much, don't worry about it. Oh, and I just poke him down there like that. That's round 2, 3. Round 1, we incorporated the starter for the first fold. Round 2, we did our first proper stretch. Round 3, we've done the next stretch. We're probably going to do 3 or 4 more of these. As it starts to feel right, that's when we know when it's time. See you in 20. Alrighty, on to fold number 4, and we're going to add some salt now. The salt is mainly for flavouring, to make sure nothing tastes too bland and to help bring out the flavour of the sourdough, but also it can react with the starter and, like I said before, retard that activity of the starter. So I like to put them in at separate times. We need 7 grams of salt in the recipe. So it's back on the scales. I'm adding the salt in. Lovely jubbly. And now I'm just going to do the stretch and fold as per normal. You can see the shape it's starting to take now. It's every time I leave it, it's starting to form a much more round shape as opposed to kind of jaggedy and uneven edges. Use my spatula to get them away from the edges. And then I'm hand underneath, stretching them out and folding them over. You can instantly feel when you return to the dough after leaving it for 20, 30 minutes, the texture's developing all the time. It's now a lot less clumpy. It's now starting to feel like any other kind of dough you'd have worked with before. But that's a nice little stretch there. Fold it over on himself. Nice and gentle, not tugging, not ripping, nice and gentle. Working with the dough, gentle fingers. Pulling it up. If it doesn't want to stretch super far, that's not a problem. Fold him on himself, and I kind of tuck him down. And then number 4, doobie doobie. There we go. Right, so at the end of round 4, I'm left with this nice ball here, so I can show you. Going to cover him over. And we'll come back to him again in 20 minutes. The way to know you're finished with this round is that the dough is nice and malleable, so it's nice and soft and flexible, and it'll kind of go where you want it to go. But by the time you're on to fold 3 and 4 of that round, it's starting to form and hold a nice big round ball. Okay? When you get there, and that's usually kind of 6, 7 fold and stretches in, when you get there, we're then going to set it aside in a nice warmish place, not too warm, not hot, and we're going to go through a bulk rise, okay? That's where we're putting a line under the kneading process, and we're saying now we're going to let all that starter we've spent all these past few days creating really go to work. It's going to start bubbling up and expanding everything. We're going to see a nice level of growth out of the dough. This is the part of the day that if you time it right, you should be able to give yourself 5 hours here. If you started a bit late, or you've got slowed down anywhere, or you have run into problems and lost a bit of time somewhere, it doesn't matter if this section is only 4 hours long. You can leave it for 6 or 7 hours if you want to. 5 is the ideal area we're looking for, and it's that growth factor, and it starts to form a bit of a different texture on the top. Not a skin. Let's call it a skin. It forms a bit of a skin on the top, a harder section which is not sticky. And we'll go through the tests later on, but there's certain signs in there of when that's finished. It's typically 5 hours, but like I say, if you've only got 3, you go with 3. I'm going to come back to this in a moment for maybe my last stretch and fold, see how it looks, and then we're almost there. That's kind of a lie. Then we get to do probably the most stressful part for any newbie baker, and that's shaping the dough and working with it out flat on the bench, putting it into the right shape. Sure will be fun. Right. That nice ball is formed there. Just rotating him so you can see him. After you've added the salt, you should notice a little film of liquid that's formed, and that's just what's released when you've added the salt into the mixture. It's nothing to worry about. I'm going to give this now its 6th stretch and fold. I'm expecting it to feel quite nice and pliable in my hands, quite almost starting to take a little bit of a silky texture. And if that is the case, I'm going to do one last one and then just leaving it for its bulk rise. It's starting to show me signs that it's ready. I'm starting to get little air pockets forming as I'm leaving it, which is exactly what I want. And also it's after every stretch and fold, it's taking a really nice rounded shape. If you're starting to see that nice rounded shape, you know you're completely on track. Right. Hand under it again. Nice little pull. I can pull it all the way out if I want to. Look at that. Fold it on itself. Nice little pull away, letting gravity do most of the work for me. This isn't a violent process, as we said. Fold it over. It's starting to be nice and stiff in there after just 2 folds. This is a really good sign that she's coming along. When I try and do the 3rd fold, there we go, we're being very gentle because we don't want it to tear. I'm only getting 3 out of it this time, so I think this one's almost ready to rock and roll. Let's compare it to my guy, compare it to old Terry. Right, Terry, let's give you a bit of a... There we are. Fold him on himself. Lovely. And again. And over. Okay, yeah, these have come on really good. Really nice. Okay, so I'm only getting 3 folds out of both of them now. They're both in a... I wonder what that was. They're both in a very similar place. So I'm going to leave them now just for one last 20-minute section. Come back, attempt one final fold on them, and then they're going to sit. They're going to sit and have their bulk rise. That's when all the magic's going to happen. It's a bit repetitive, this process, but the quality of the bread, like the structure of the inside of the bread of what you've got, a lot of what you're doing here with the stretching and folding really makes a difference when it comes to cooking the bread. You could of course do less stretching and folding if you're pinched for time, but especially for your first ones and to get into a good habit, I'd really be trying to do 6 or 7 of them, spaced out, 20 minutes. If you need to space them out over half an hour because that fits in with your schedule better, that's absolutely fine. You don't want to leave them much longer than that. You don't want to leave them whereby the top is exposed to the air for too long because it'll start to form that little thicker skin that we mentioned earlier on. That's something we want later, but we don't want that to happen just yet. So if you go away and you haven't set yourself a timer and you forget about it for 45 minutes and you come back and it started to harden up, that's going to impact the quality of the bread that comes out the other end. So I've been having a timer every 20 minutes, back here, check them over. By the time I've faffed around with the camera and whatnot, it might be 25 minutes before I've actually done the stretch and fold, but that doesn't matter so much. It's just the regularity. 6 done, 1 more to go, then I think we're on to the next phase. The final stretch and fold is holding a nice round ball right underneath. Look at that, lovely jubbly. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm getting 3 out of him, and then by the 3rd he's forming this lovely big round ball. So I'm going to say that one's done, ready now. We're not going to get any more folds out of him. What we've essentially done by folding it over and over and over again is we've done that kneading, using his own body weight to compress the flour compress the dough when and then allowing it to expand again and repeat. So that's worked great. He's now ready to be set aside in a warm place to do the bulk rise. As I mentioned before, ideally this is about 5 hours. I'm going to check back in on him periodically after about 2.5 hours. He could be ready as early as 3, but 4 or 5 is quite typical. What I'm expecting to see is I'm expecting to go from this one ball here to covering most of the bowl. He'll expand properly out. He'll expand the whole way over the bowl, take up almost all of it, swell up a little bit, and have little like air bubbles forming on the top of it, quite large ones. He will also have a bit of at the moment he's got a slightly sticky texture. That'll disappear and he'll have a bit of almost his own skin on top of him by the time he's finished his bulk rise. Until then, go off and do something else. Go check out some more of the videos that we make on the Bun Beard channel, or do anything else you want to do. I'll see you in a little while. Good evening, and welcome to the hard bit. This is the part that kind of make or breaks the whole journey. But with a little bit of care and attention, and a few key thoughts in your head, it's possible to get through this like a pro. So, it's been about 4.5, come up to 5 hours since we let our dough to go through its bulk rise. We're going to check those in a minute, but the key thing we need to remember here is you're going to be playing with a sticky dough that wants to stick to warm things. Make sure your hands are nice and clean and nice and dry. Make sure you've got a nice bit of surface to work with that's also been wiped down. I've just got a bit of flour on it. The less contact time with the dough, the better. We're going to go through 2 rounds of shaping the dough. So we're first going to tip it out, we're going to shape it, then we're going to leave it alone for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we're going to pull it apart and shape it again, and that'll be our final shape, and then it's going to go in the baskets for going in the fridge overnight. She's expanded nicely since we last looked at her. She's gone from that nice tight little ball, she's swollen up, she's spaced herself out, she's got a nice non-sticky top to the end, to the top. If you poke her, she slowly springs back. That's what we're after. You can see a little bit of dent stays there and she slowly starts to pull back, but it keeps the dent present. So, she's ready to be shaped. This slight thickness, this slight little skin that's formed is our friend now. That's the bit of the dough that's going to be face down on the surface. Underneath there, it's all sticky and gooey. And we want that sticky and gooiness top side up. I'm going to go through this whole thing twice. Another beauty of having 2 loaves ready to go is I can show you the whole thing twice, side by side. The steps involved in folding it all over are actually quite simple. I'll do them as slow as possible. A key thing to remember is soft hands. We're not ripping, we're not tearing, and we're trying not to hold on to it for too long. Gentle, deliberate, fast movements is what we're looking for. In here, I've got just a little bit of plain flour, which I'm going to lightly dust across this surface here. As you get better and better at working with high hydration, sticky doughs, you'll start to limit the amount of flour you're using in this phase. However, when you're just getting started, use a bit of flour, scatter it around. Don't go mental, you don't want it all clumping together on the dough, but use it to basically make your life a bit easier. I use a sieve to disperse it. Right, that's my work surface. Exactly the same method I used earlier on in terms of getting the spatula around the edges to peel the dough away from the edges of the bowl, which is going to make it so much easier when you turn it upside down. You want gravity to do most of the work and gravity to pull it out for you. Such as this. Right, it's gone upside down. It's going to gently tease it out. Gently tease him out. There you come, my boy. Boom. There we go. There he is. You get the odd crispy bit that's formed on the side that attaches itself. Just discard it. Right. Now we've got a pile of our proved dough. The first aim is to make it into a nice big rectangle. So I'll pick up the ends and I'm just going to let gravity help me to spread him out. Nice and easily, just like that. I'm basically unravelling him from all of that rising he's just done, letting him come to his full size. Lovely. Lovely jubbly. Like that. Now, another key reason why you don't put too much flour down here is we're now going to start folding this over on itself, and you don't want all of that unproven flour inside of the dough. But just that little bit of flour that's on the base is now going to form this all to stick together nicely. So we're essentially folding it onto itself. Folding there, into there. Folding there, into there. Folding there, into there. Folding there, into there. Great. The next aim is to roll it on itself into a ball at this end of the bench. As we're rolling it in, we're going to pick in the edges and pulling it into the middle so we get a slightly tighter and tighter ball as we go along. Very easy, nice and gentle, deliberate hands, quick hands. So I'm pulling in the corners and rolling it over. Pulling in the corners, rolling it over. Corner, corner, rolling it. Corner, corner, rolling it. Corner, rolling it. And then I'm picking up and slopping him down. Now, you've got this nicely floured area here, and I essentially start to roll him around a little bit to make sure we've got a nice tight shape. So I'm going to pop him into this floured area and just make sure we've got a nice round shape. All I'm doing here is I'm using my left hand to push the dough underneath, the right hand to roll it round. Let's make sure it's all nice and tight. See that? That's ball number one, ready to sit there for his bench rest. All I've done is roll him on himself a little bit So all those folds that we've done start to form a tighter and tighter ball. He can now sit there for about 15 to 20 minutes. He'll spread again slightly, but all those folds that we've made, they'll start to seal together to form a nice round ball. We're going to repeat this process once more with a slightly different folding technique. But for a minute, see there's a little bit of tension in his skin. He can just sit there. I'm going to shape the other one. Okay, up we go. Pop. Okay, you see how it's the thicker, non-sticky skin on the bottom and all this stickiness on the top. Spread him out. Let gravity help you wherever possible. There we go, lovely. Great, you can see that nicely. Okay, same again, just going to fold him in on himself. Fold, 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 fold. If you get to a point where your hands have accumulated a little bit of dough that have become a bit sticky, just give them a bit of a dry rub. Get all that, any stickiness off of them. And I'm rolling, 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 folding in the edges, then rolling over some more. Folding in the edges, rolling over, edges, over, edges. Right, there we go. He's formed into a nice little ball. We want him to be sat on a little bit of flour for when he does his bench rest. I'm happy with that there. Okay, so we've got two this is called the pre-shaping, two pre-shaped balls of dough. They're going to start to form little air bubbles on the surface over the next few minutes. I'm just going to have a bit of time resting here before we do their final shape and then pop them in their baskets for the overnight rise. Back in, let's call it 10. Right, been about 10 minutes. Couple of key tips. As soon as you've taken your dough out of these bowls, put some water in them. You do not want this stuff to start setting. It'll be a nightmare to get out. So, throwing them over here. As the bun will tell you, wet dough, when it sets, is like concrete. So, there you go. I've covered them with a cloth. Keep anything from contaminating them in dust or dirt or flies or whatever, but also so that not too much air is getting to the exterior, that it kind of goes a bit hard. We don't want that right now because we're about to play with them a bit more. What are we aiming for now? We're aiming to turn these already nice balls of dough into just a slightly tighter version of what they currently are. The reason you want it nice and tight, you want lots of surface tension. The surface tension is A, what we kind of cut into tomorrow morning when we come to bake. It's what we score with a knife or cut into with scissors, and that is what forms those nice patterns when we bake and we have a loaf that rises. The cuts add direction to the rise, but most importantly, that tension allows the dough to rise in a sustainable way as opposed to just kind of otherwise it would just kind of spread outwards. So the surface tension on the ball is really important, and the better job you do at that, and you'll get better over time, the nicer the loaf will come out in terms of the inside structure, but also how it looks and the kind of the thin crackly crust on it that we're after. So what we've just done is we've folded them over on themselves from a very big and stretched out starting point. Now we're going to fold them over on themselves from a much smaller starting point just to gain a little bit more compression. So I'm going to do some folding, and I'm going to do what's called a tension pull, which is where I'm just going to add a little bit more tension into the ball by dragging it towards me using the surface as resistance. Let me show you what all that is. There they are. You can see how they've splayed themselves out a bit further. That's a good sign. Now, at the start of this course, I said you don't need any other implements than what you can normally find in any kitchen. If you do this a few times and you want to get yourself an implement to help, a dough scraper, this one's about £1, this one's probably about £10. A dough scraper could be quite useful. When you've got bigger batches of dough, cutting it in half, when you want to get dough out of a bowl, this shaped one, and I just knocked some flour on the floor. Cool. And when you want to get these balls of dough off of the bench, so you can start through the next round of shaping, a scraper is quite useful. Now, I'm not going to use a scraper right now because I'm doing exactly the same as you at home. I'm just going to use my hands to show you how easy it is to do, but a scraper would make it even easier. First of all, I'm going to get rid of all this excess flour that's in the way. Told you a lie. I'm going to use this scraper to move the higher hydration one out the way. And I'll put it a little bit too close. All right, you can sit there for a second. Right, now I'm going to put a bit more dough on this surface. Here's the ball from the new starter from Juno. This is one we're going to work with first. What we're going to do is we're going to flip her upside down so that currently her head is facing upwards. It's going to be on the bottom. I'm just going to put her in and then flip her up. A tiniest little bit stick to the bench, which if you'd had a scraper would have come with it, but that's not going to worry me. You get out of there. Okay, I'm now going to stretch her out sideways. So give her a nice gentle pull. We don't want to tear at her too much. As we said before, we don't want to break the glutinous bonds. So give her a little pull, fold her in on herself, like that. And then, so she looks like a little blanket, fold her over. Turn her around and fold her over. And just keep folding in the edges and rotating, and folding in the edges into the middle. Keep rotating, nice and gently, not leaving your fingers on there for too long. Keep rotating. What you want to start to see is it's forming a nice round shape, and it's kind of got this pulled together effect in the middle is what we're after. So we keep pulling it in, keep pulling it in. I then like to give it one last big fold over towards the end and roll it onto itself. Okay? Again, I'm going to do a little bit of shaping with my hands to get the kind of circular shape that I want. I'm just pushing it under with the left, rolling it round with the right. I'm in the middle of the bench, and right now that's ready for his tension pull. Let's get that bit out of the way. And all I'm doing is I'm dragging it towards me, turning it 90 degrees and doing the same again. By dragging it towards me, the front of the dough that's sat on the surface is basically using that to cause tension in the skin. So I'm pulling it, and dragging it, and that's basically allowing all of the dough to kind of sit hard up against the surface and really make it nice and tense. Turn it 90 degrees. Pull it, 90 degrees, pull it, bang. That's basically ready. We've now got a beautiful round ball of dough with a few delicate little air bubbles in the top and loads of surface tension. This feels really, really dense. Right? That is cracking. He's ready to go in his basket. I normally leave him just there for about 30 to 40 seconds so the seal we've made on the bottom seals itself up, and then we're going to turn it into a basket. You won't have one of these at home, but as we said before, any kind of deep bowl with a a cloth laid in it will serve exactly the same purpose. Today I'm taking the cloth out because I want to get the nice ringed effect on this one. I'm going to leave the cloth in one and the cloth out of one to kind of show you guys what it does. What I will do though, these are also very inexpensive. What I'll do is I will just lightly flour it because I don't want him to stick to it. It also gives the surface a nice bit of colouring for when it's cooked. Right, he's now ready to come out of there into there. Again, if you had a scraper at home, this is the kind of time you'd use a scraper to get underneath him and turn him up, but we're not using one of those for this dough, so with my hands, just quickly tease him off, turn him upside down, and pop him in. And there he is. You can see he's sealed up around the bottom. The bit that was his head here earlier on is at the bottom of the basket, so it's gone from being on top to being on the bottom to being on top again to now being face down in the basket, ready to go in the fridge overnight. I then put a little bit of flour around his edges just to make sure that as he rises in here, he's not going to stick to the outside of the basket, and he looks fantastic. Like that. That is spot on. If what you're making looks anything like this, you should be delighted with yourselves. I'm going to cover him now, pop him in the fridge for about 12 hours, when we're then going to pull him out and stick him in the oven. That's the hard bit done. I'm going to show you one more time from a slightly different angle so you can see what I'm doing with my hands. I'm going to use the scraper on this guy because he's a bit more hydrated, as we said, so he's a bit harder to work with. Right. Boom. There we go. Right. I'm teasing him apart, not pulling him hard, teasing him apart, folding him over, folding him over. Looks like he's cuddled up in a blanket. And then take the top and fold that over. Turn him round and then start pulling those edges into the middle. Keep going round, keep going round. That's it. We basically want it so you don't have any external kind of creases on the outside. It doesn't look like there's any big folds in there. Right, that's starting to get there. See that? We've not really got any folds anyway around. I'll do one last big one, roll him on himself, and there he is. Just like that. Now, I'm going to go through my process of... Now the tension pull. I'm just pulling him towards me like that. Turn him round. Try and do it one-handed. Pulling him towards me like that. He doesn't travel very far. The front face of him basically stays where it is and the rest kind of squeezes up on top of him. There we go. Just like that. Turn him round. Do it again. 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 Right. He looks cracking as well. Should feel really dense to the touch. Beautiful. Boom. Look at that. Delighted with that. Those two have come out really good. Give him a little flouring around his edges. Look at those guys. Chuff for those. They are now ready to go in the fridge, like we said, overnight for 12 hours. Tomorrow morning, all we're going to do is crack the oven on, get these guys out, make a few snips and throw them in there. I'm going to do that as a separate video. It should be coming fairly quickly after this one, but there's a lot of information that's gone on today, so focus on getting these steps right, and while they're rising in the fridge overnight, we can start to think about what comes next. Cover them so they don't get too much air. Right, you're now 90% of the way there. Maybe more, maybe 95% of the way there. All the hard work's done. If you did that right, you didn't end up with a sticky explosion of dough all over your fingers. The reason I go through the methods that I do and those particular folds in that particular order is I think they are the best way of folding and playing with sticky dough, minimizing your chances of having an explosion that just becomes very difficult to work with. Some other methods that are out there and other people that will show you different ways of doing it also work absolutely fine, but I think more often than not, their methods sometimes can end up with, like we said, collapsing dough, and you end up scraping it all and sticking it in a tin, stick it in a loaf tin to try and rescue it. The way I've showed you is specifically designed to make it as straightforward and reliable as possible to get a really, really good loaf of bread. My last key tip of the day, if you enjoy this process, you enjoy what comes out of it, and you feel like you're going to do it more, do yourself a favour, first and foremost, buy a flour brush, because your partner, spouse, mum, dad, or the cat you live with that's going to start licking all this stuff up is going to lose their head if you don't tidy up all the flour. I found this the hard way by constantly leaving floury messes everywhere. Tidy up, it's important. Right. If you've done this right, it should be quite late in the day now by the time you've wrapped this all up. Get yourself some beauty sleep, and we'll see you tomorrow for bake time.